He had conquered Persia. He had brought Egypt to its knees. He had marched his armies to the edges of the known world, places where maps simply ended, and man whispered of monsters beyond the horizon. At 30 years old, Alexander of Macedon was the most powerful human being alive, and he was riding toward a man who lived in a clay jar. The year was 336 BC. Alexander had just inherited his father's kingdom and his father's enemies. Before marching east to rewrite history, he made a stop. Not to a temple, not to a palace, to a marketplace in Corinth, where a philosopher named Diogenes was lying in the sun. Diogenes of Sinope, a man who had been exiled from his hometown for defacing coins, literally, physically defacing the currency of his city. A man who owned nothing except a wooden bowl and threw that away too when he saw a child drinking water with cupped hands. "Even the child has taught me something," he said. "I was carrying unnecessary weight." He slept in a large ceramic jar near the marketplace. He begged for food, he urinated in public, he insulted kings to their faces, and he called himself a cosmopolites, a citizen of the world, at a time when that phrase had never been spoken before. When Alexander arrived, surrounded by his generals, his horses, his banners, the machinery of empire, Diogenes did not stand up. He looked at Alexander the way you might look at a cloud passing overhead, curious, unimpressed, unbothered. Alexander, who was used to cities surrendering at the mere rumor of his approach, stood before this man in silence for a moment. Then he spoke. "I am Alexander the Great. Ask me for anything you wish." Diogenes looked at him and said, "Yes, stand a little out of my sunlight." The generals laughed nervously. Some reached for their swords. But Alexander laughed too. And then he said something that has haunted philosophers for 2000 years. "If I were not Alexander, I would wish to be Diogenes." Read that again. The man who had conquered half of the known world, who commanded armies of 100,000 men, who had already been declared a god by the Egyptians, looked at a homeless philosopher lying in the dirt and said, "I envy him." What did Alexander see in Diogenes that he did not see in himself? This is not a simple question. Alexander was not stupid. He was tutored by Aristotle. He had read Homer's Iliad so many times, he slept with it under his pillow, next to a dagger. He understood philosophy. He understood the idea of the good life, and yet, standing before a man who owned nothing, needed nothing, feared nothing, something in him broke open. Diogenes had a philosophy, though he never wrote it down. He called it Cynicism, from the Greek word for dog, because dogs, he said, live without shame, without pretense, without need of approval. His central argument was brutal in its simplicity. Everything you think you need, status, wealth, reputation, beauty, power, is a cage you have built for yourself. Every desire is a chain, every ambition is a leash. The man who needs nothing cannot be controlled by anything. And here is the razor edge of his logic. Alexander, for all of his power, needed to conquer. He needed the next battle. He needed the next city, the next horizon. Without expansion, he felt himself shrinking. His generals noticed it. His biographers recorded it. Toward the end of his campaigns, when his soldiers refused to march further east, when they finally said enough, Alexander wept, not from sadness, from withdrawal, like a man whose supply had run out. Diogenes needed the sun to stay in his face. That was enough. Alexander needed the world, and the world was never enough. Two men, two answers to the oldest questions in philosophy. How would a human being live? Alexander said fully, expansively, leave a mark so large the world cannot forget you. Diogenes said freely, without weight, lead so little that nothing can touch you. Both were consistent, both were radical, both died within a year of each other, 323 BC. Alexander at 32, possibly poisoned, his empire immediately fracturing into pieces the moment he exhaled his last breath. Diogenes at 90, some say older, in his jar, which by then he no longer even needed. The question this meeting leaves us with is not who was right. It is something more uncomfortable. Which one are you? Not which one you admire, not which one you would choose in a philosophy classroom. Which one are you actually living as? Right now, in the choices you make, in the things you cannot walk away from, in the version of the world you need in order to feel real. Alexander envied Diogenes, but he did not become him. He got back on his horse, he rode east. He conquered India, he died young in Babylon, in a palace, surrounded by generals who would spend the next 40 years killing each other over what he left behind. Diogenes died in the sun, alone, asking for nothing, owing nothing. When he asked where he wished to be buried, he reportedly smiled and said, face down, so that when the world turns upside down, as it always does, I will finally be right side up. Maybe the point was never to choose between them. Maybe the point is to notice, really notice, how much of what you are chasing is conquest, and how much of what you are carrying is weight you once picked up and simply forgot to put down. The sunlight is still there. Someone is standing in it.